Hello, my name is Michael, and I obsess. I come across something that grabs me and I consume until I can't take anymore, and then I'm on to the next. Some obsessions last a week, others a lifetime. It is my intention to explore these obsessions with you as they occur while the passion is hot. Welcome to Eclectic Obsessions. Two young men strangle their inferior classmate, hide his body in their apartment, and invite his friends and family to a dinner party as a means to challenge the perfection of their crime. Rope is a 1948 American psychological crime thriller film directed by Alfred Hitchcock based on the 1929 play of the same name by Patrick Hamilton. The film was adapted by Hume Cronyn with a screenplay by Arthur Lawrence. Here's a scenario that should date me a bit. I rented this film from a video store as a VHS cassette. I watched it at home on a tiny black and white TV. I was immediately drawn in by the story, the acting, and by Hitchcock's claustrophobic cinematography. The tension that builds in this film is palpable. We will be exploring this experimental and underappreciated Hitchcock gem on this episode of Eclectic Obsessions.
I just think we ought to wait till after you graduate.
I don't.
It's only a month.
Janet, a month?
Please.
It's all right. I personally consider us engaged as of now. Congratulations.
David, no.
Look, you can say yes in a taxi. I have a 2:30 appointment
I'm
and you're...
staying right here.
Oh, afraid you'll say yes?
I'll see you tonight at Brandon's party.
Okay. You can say yes, sir, just as well as in a taxi. Goodbye, darling.
Bye.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you'll ever see him alive. What happened to David Kentley changed my life completely, and the lives of 7 others. Janet Walker, Henry Kentley, the boy's father, his aunt, Mrs. Atwater, his best friend, Kenneth Lawrence, a housekeeper named Mrs. Wilson, and the 2 who were responsible for everything, Brandon Shaw and Philip Morgan.
Mouse, cat and mouse.
Philip.
Which is the cat and which is the mouse?
Enough of that.
He's got it. He knows. He knows. All right, he knows. Easy, I'll take care of you. Won't. I'd just as soon kill you as kill him.
Rope was produced by Alfred Hitchcock and Sidney Bernstein as the first of their Transatlantic Pictures productions. Starring James Stewart, John Dahl, and Farley Granger, this is the first of Hitchcock's Technicolor films, and is notable for taking place in real time and being edited so as to appear as a single continuous shot through the use of long takes. It is the second of Hitchcock's limited setting films, the first being Lifeboat. The original play was inspired by the real-life murder of 14-year-old Bobby Franks in 1924 by University of Chicago students Nathan Leopold and Richard Loeb. 2 brilliant young men, Brandon Shaw, played by John Dahl, and Philip Morgan, played by Farley Granger, strangled to death their former classmate from Harvard University, David Kentley, played by Dick Hogan, in their Manhattan penthouse apartment. They commit the crime as an intellectual exercise. They want to prove their superiority by committing the perfect murder. After hiding the body in a large antique wooden chest, Brandon and Philip host a dinner party at the apartment, which has a panoramic view of Manhattan's skyline. The guests who are unaware of what has happened include the victim's father, Mr. Kentley, played by Cedric Hardwicke, and aunt, Mrs. Atwater, played by Constance Collier. His mother is not able to attend because of a cold. Also there are his fiancée, Janet Walker, played by Joan Chandler, and her former lover, Kenneth Lawrence, played by Douglas Dick, who was once David's close friend. Brandon uses the chest containing the body as a buffet table for the food just before their housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, played by Edith Evanson, arrives to help with the party. Now the fun begins, Brandon says when the first guests arrive. Brandon and Philip's idea for the murder was inspired years earlier by the conversations with their prep school housemaster, publisher Rupert Cadell, played by Jimmy Stewart. While they were at school, Rupert had discussed with them in an apparently approving way the intellectual concepts of Friedrich Nietzsche's Übermensch from Thus Spoke Zarathustra and Thomas de Quincey's On Murder, considered as one of the fine arts, as a means of showing one's superiority over others. He too is among the guests at the party, since Brandon in particular thinks that he would approve of their work of art. Brandon's subtle hints about David's absence indirectly lead to a discussion on the art of murder. Brandon appears calm and in control, although when he first speaks to Rupert he is nervously excited and stammering. Philip, on the other hand, is visibly upset and morose. He does not conceal it well and starts to drink too much. When David's aunt, Mrs. Atwater, who fancies herself a fortune-teller, tells him that his hands will bring him great fame, she is referring to his skill at the piano, but he appears to think this refers to the notoriety of being a strangler. Much of the conversation, however, focuses on David and his strange absence, which worries the guests. A suspicious Rupert quizzes a fidgety Philip about this and about some of the inconsistencies that have been raised in conversation. For example, Philip vehemently denies ever strangling a chicken at the Shaw's farm, though Rupert has seen Philip strangle several. Philip later complains to Brandon about having had a rotten evening, not because of David's murder, but because of Rupert's questioning. As the evening goes on, David's father and fiancée begin to worry because he has neither arrived nor phoned. Brandon increases the tension by playing matchmaker between Janet and Kenneth. Mrs. Kentley calls, overwrought because she has not heard from David, and Mr. Kentley decides to leave. He takes with him some books Brandon has given him, tied together with the rope Brandon and Philip used to strangle his son. When Rupert goes to leave, Mrs. Wilson accidentally hands him David's monogrammed hat, further arousing his suspicion. Rupert later returns to the apartment after everyone else has departed, pretending that he has left his cigarette case behind. He asks for a drink and then stays to theorize about David's disappearance. He is encouraged by Brandon, who hopes Rupert will understand and even applaud them. A drunken Philip is unable to take it anymore. He throws a glass and says, cat and mouse, but which is the cat and which is the mouse? Rupert finally lifts the lid of the chest and finds the body inside. He is horrified, but also deeply ashamed, realizing that Brandon and Philip used his own rhetoric to rationalize murder. Rupert disavows all his previous talk of superiority and inferiority, and then seizes Brandon's gun and fires several shots out the window to attract attention. As police sirens approach, Rupert pulls up a chair next to the chest, and the film ends.
Murder is an art, and as such, the privilege of committing it should be reserved for those few who are really superior individuals.
And the victims, inferior beings whose lives are unimportant anyway.
Obviously. You aren't planning to do away with a few inferiors by any chance?
Who knows? I'm a creature of whim.
Is it all over?
Brandon! A stupid display like that in front of somebody else will be just as good as a confession. Being weak is a mistake.
Because it's being human?
Because it's being ordinary.
There's something upsetting both of you a great deal.
I think we're going to get caught.
You've got to pull yourself together.
It's odd the way one can pyramid simple facts into wild fantasies, isn't it?
Good and evil, right and wrong, were invented for the ordinary average man, the inferior man, because he needs them. This party will be the most exciting ever given. Oh, no.
Alfred Hitchcock was fascinated by the Aristotelian unities, being the rules for drama derived from a passage in Aristotle's Poetics. In their neoclassical form, they are as follows. 1. Unity of action. A play should have one action that it follows with minimal subplots. 2. Unity of time. The action in a play should occur over a period of no more than 24 hours. 3. Unity of place. A play should exist in a single physical space and should not attempt to compress geography, nor should the stage represent more than one place. And since his film was based on a play, he seized the opportunity to shoot Rope in real time, a daring cinematic first. Rope explored the relationship between time, space, and action, reinventing established recording concepts with long takes, another industry first. The film is one of Hitchcock's most experimental and one of the most interesting experiments ever attempted by a major director working with big box office names. Abandoning many standard film techniques to allow for long, unbroken scenes. Each shot ran continuously for up to 10 minutes without interruption. It was shot on a single set, aside from the opening establishing shot street scene under the credits. Camera moves were carefully planned and there was almost no editing. The walls of the set were on rollers and could silently be moved out of the way to make way for the camera and then replaced when they were to come back into shot. Prop men constantly had to move the furniture and other props out of the way of the large Technicolor camera and then ensure that they were replaced in the correct location. A team of sound men and camera operators kept the camera and microphones in constant motion as the actors kept to a carefully choreographed set of cues. The extraordinary cyclorama in the background was the largest backing ever used on a soundstage. It included models of the Empire State and the Chrysler buildings. Numerous chimneys smoke, lights come on in buildings, neon signs lit up, and the sunset slowly unfolds as the movie progresses. Within the course of the film, the clouds, made of spun glass, changed position and shape 8 times. A camera operator's foot was broken by a heavy dolly during one intensive take, and he was gagged to stop his vocal noises from being recorded on the film and hauled out of the studio so that filming could continue without interruption. Hitchcock shot for periods lasting up to 10 minutes, the length of a film camera magazine, continuously panning from actor to actor, though most shots in the film wound up being shorter. Every other segment ends by panning against or tracking into an object, a man's jacket blocking the entire screen, or the back of a piece of furniture, for example. In this way, Hitchcock effectively masked half the cuts in the film. However, at the end of 20 minutes, 2 magazines of film make one reel of film on the projector in the movie theater. The projectionist, when the film was shown in theaters, had to change reels. On these changeovers, Hitchcock cuts to a new camera setup, deliberately not disguising the cut. Alfred Hitchcock's cameo is a signature occurrence in most of his films. In this film, Hitchcock is considered to make 2 appearances, according to Arthur Lawrence in the documentary Rope Unleashed, available on the DVD and Blu-ray. Lawrence says that Hitchcock is a man walking down a Manhattan street in the opening scene immediately after the title sequence. At 55 minutes and 19 seconds into the film, a red neon sign in the far background showing Hitchcock's profile with Reduco, the fictitious weight loss product used in his lifeboat cameo, starts blinking. As the guests are escorted to the door, actors Joan Chandler and Douglas Dick stop to have a few words. The sign appears and disappears in the background several times, right between their visages, right under the eyes of the spectators. David Butoff was the unaccredited composer of music heard in the film's opening and closing credits, but only diegetic music is heard throughout the rest of the film. Therefore, we only hear music when Philip is seen playing Poulenc's Perpetual Motion on the piano. One might notice that the title of the piece of music is rather revealing. The camera and the characters are almost always in motion, as are the minds of the 2 murderers and their guests. The Übermensch, German for overman, beyond man, or superhuman, is a concept in the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. In his 1883 book Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche has his character Zarathustra posit the Übermensch as a goal for humanity to set for itself. The German prefix über can have connotations of superiority, transcendence, excessiveness, or intensity, depending on the words to which it is attached. Mensch refers to a human being rather than a male specifically. An Übermensch is someone who can establish his own values as the world in which others live their lives, often unaware that they are not pre-given. This means an Übermensch can affect and influence the lives of others. In other words, an Übermensch has its own values, independent of others, which affects and dominates others' lives that they may not have predetermined values, but only herd instinct. An Übermensch is then someone who has a life which is not merely to live each day with no meanings when nothing in the past and future is more important than the present, or more precisely, the pleasure and happiness in the present, but with the purpose for humanity. Rope's screenplay was adapted from a play which was tragically inspired by true events. In 1924, Nathan Freudenthal Leopold Jr. and Richard Albert Loeb murdered a 14-year-old boy, Robert Bobby Franks. The duo that would later be referred to as Leopold and Loeb were sentenced to life imprisonment. Leopold, age 19, and Loeb, age 18 at the time, were college students and considered themselves living Nietzschean supermen. Not only did they think they were above the law, but they also believed they could commit the perfect crime. Leopold and Loeb believed that they were actually living examples of the overman which Nietzsche had written about. In so believing, they thought they were superior to Bobby Franks, their victim, as well as the authorities. Before the murder was committed, Leopold wrote to Loeb encouraging and reminding him of their beliefs, saying, "A superman is, on account of certain superior qualities inherent in him, exempted from the ordinary laws which govern men. He is not liable for anything he may do." On Murder Considered as One of the Fine Arts is an essay by Thomas de Quincey, first published in 1827 in Blackwood's Magazine. The essay is a fictional, satirical account of an address made to a gentleman's club concerning the aesthetic appreciation of murder. Rupert paraphrases this essay in the party scene to Mrs. Atwater.
Is it all over?
I'm afraid so, Rupert.
Oh, what a pity. In another moment, you might have been strangling each other instead of a chicken.
Mr. Goodell, really?
No, but a man's honor was at stake. And personally, I think a chicken is as good a reason for murder as a blonde, a mattress full of dollar bills, or any of the customary unimaginative reasons.
Well, now, you don't really approve of murder, Rupert, if I may.
You may, and I do. Think of the problems it would solve. Unemployment, poverty, standing in line for theater tickets.
I must say I've had a perfectly dreadful time getting tickets for that new musical. What's it called? You know.
The something with what's her name? My dear Miss Atwater, careful application of the trigger finger and a pair of seats in the first row is yours for the shooting. And have you had any difficulty in getting into our Velvet Rope restaurants?
Frightful.
A very simple matter. A flick of the knife, madame. And if you'll kindly step this way, step over the head waiter's body. Thank you. And here's your table.
Rupert, you're the end.
There's a hotel clerk I could cheerfully flick a knife at.
Oh, no, sorry. Knives may not be used on hotel employees. They are in the death by slow torture category.
Oh.
Along with bird lovers, small children, and tap dancers. Landlords, of course, are another matter. You're seeking an apartment? Call on our Miss Sashwaite of the Blunt Instrument Department.
What a divine idea. If it suits your purpose, merely... But then we'd all be murdering each other.
Oh, no. Oh, no. After all, murder is, or should be, an art. Not one of the seven lively, perhaps, but an art, nevertheless. And as such, the privilege of committing it should be reserved for those few who are really superior individuals.
And the victims, inferior beings whose lives are unimportant anyway.
Obviously. Now, mind you, I don't hold with the extremists who feel that there should be open season for murder all year round. No. Personally, I would prefer to have Cut a Throat Week or Strangulation Day.
Probably a symptom of approaching senility, but I must confess that I really don't appreciate this morbid humor.
Well, the humor was unintentional.
But you're not serious about these theories.
Of course he is.
Oh, you're both pulling my leg.
No, why do you think that?
Well, Brandon, the notion that murder is an art which a few superior beings should be allowed to practice.
In season.
Now, I know you're not serious.
But I am. I'm a very serious fellow.
Then may I ask, who is to decide that a human being is inferior and is therefore a suitable victim for murder?
The few who are privileged to commit murder.
And just who might they be?
Oh, myself. Philip. Possibly Rupert.
I'm sorry, Kenneth. You're out.
Gentlemen, I'm serious.
So are we, Mr. Kentley. The few are those men of such intellectual and cultural superiority that they're above the traditional moral concepts. Good and evil, right and wrong, were invented for the ordinary average man, the inferior man, because he needs them.
Then obviously you agree with Nietzsche and his theory of the Superman.
Yes, I do.
So did Hitler.
Hitler was a paranoid savage. His Supermen, all fascist Supermen, were brainless murderers. I'd hang any who were left. But then you see, I'd hang them first for being stupid. I'd hang all incompetents and fools anyway. There are far too many in the world.
Then perhaps you should hang me, Brandon, for I confess I'm so stupid I don't know whether you're all serious or not. But in any case, I'd rather not hear any more of your, forgive me, contempt for humanity and for the standards of a world that I believe is civilized.
Civilized?
Yes.
Perhaps what is called civilization is hypocrisy.
Perhaps.
Well, I'm sure Rupert, fortunately,
Oh, now, gentlemen,
has
really,
the intelligence and imagination
Please,
to...
Brandon, I think we've had just about enough.
In an interview with screenplay writer Arthur Lawrence, it was said, "What was curious to me was that Rope was obviously about homosexuals. The word was never mentioned. Not by Hitch, not by anyone at Warner's. It was referred to as it. They were going to do a picture about it, and the actors were it. The thing to me is best about the picture is not the technical side. What is extraordinary about it is its treatment of homosexuality. I mean, today it is still one of the most sophisticated movies made on that subject. Hitchcock certainly knew that, and it certainly attracted him. And what he liked was not that they were homosexuals, but that they were homosexual murderers. If they had just been murderers, he wouldn't have been interested, and if they had just been homosexuals, he wouldn't have been interested. Throughout Rope, homosexual activity and murder are equated, juxtaposing homosexuality and the capacity for murder. This in turn begs the comparison between the two and likens them perceived as equally severe affronts to the social order. When one examines the subtle clues that Hitchcock lends to the audience, the exact kind of relationship between Brandon and Philip becomes clear. In the scenes where Hitchcock employs tight framing, Philip and Brandon stand almost too closely to one another. The two seem to be able to invade each other's intimate space without experiencing any kind of discomfort, a quality usually reserved for lovers. One scene where this particularly is true is when Brandon and Philip open the bottle of champagne immediately after David's murder. Throughout this scene, almost no distance exists between the two, and the angle at which the camera is located makes it appear as though the two are touching. At one point, the two actually touch hands when they are trying to remove the cork from the bottle of champagne, after which Philip is able to successfully remove the cork and a popping sound erupts from the bottle. The close proximity between Philip and Brandon, as well as the obvious phallic imagery of that scene, heavily implies a homosexual relationship between the two. Once the subtext of homosexuality is established, the murder of David Kentley takes on a new meaning. In Brandon's apartment, both he and Philip strangle their friend David and leave his asphyxiated body in a chest in the middle of the room. Immediately after the murder, the two men appear to be in a post-orgasmic state, characterized by panting and elation, and while in this state, Brandon decides to light a cigarette, a Hollywood post-coitus cliché. Soon after, Philip poses the question, "How did you feel during it?" To which Brandon responds,
Don't remember feeling very much of anything. Until his body went limp. And I knew it was over.
And then?
Then I felt tremendously exhilarated.
Rupert is both a distinctly patriarchal and neutral presence at the beginning of the film. He was the teacher of Brandon, Philip, and David, and does not exhibit a strong opinion on whether murder is morally reprehensible. It was Rupert who taught Brandon that murder is a privilege for the elites and that it is the right of the strong to eliminate the weak. When understanding that Rope juxtaposes the capacity for murder and homosexuality, this may appear to be a clue that Rupert is a homosexual. But because the film only suggests a homosexual act through the murderous actions, it is more likely that Rupert does not abhor homosexual behavior, but has never engaged in it.
In Rope, you have a teacher who was also supposed to be homosexual. I smiled because Hitch wanted Cary Grant for that part, Montgomery Clift, for one of the boys. And according to what he told me, they both turned it down because they didn't want to be identified with it. But the intention was that this teacher had influenced these boys with Nietzsche's philosophy of the Superman, and he also had an affair with one of them.
Well, now, you don't really approve of murder, Rupert, if I may.
You may, and I do. Think of the problems it would solve. Unemployment, poverty, standing in line for theater tickets.
Well, Jimmy Stewart never had an affair with anyone. He was just a Boy Scout. So the picture was curiously off focus and didn't have the sexual center that it should have. He was very good as a detective, but he had no relation to those boys at all.
When Rupert confronts Brandon and Philip about their actions, still claiming to be unsure of their culpability, he is unwilling to speak on the moral character of their actions until he is faced with undisputable evidence of their guilt, David's dead body. Rupert's obvious horror and shock upon seeing the body seals the fate of Brandon and Philip, as well as communicating to the audience the moral value of their nature. This is stressed during Rupert's subsequent monologue, which alleges that what allowed Philip and Brandon to commit the murder was innate in their character.
Brandon, until this very moment, this world and the people in it have always been dark and incomprehensible to me. And I've tried to clear my way with logic and superior intellect. And you've thrown my own words right back in my face, Brandon. You were right, too. If nothing else, a man should stand by his words. But you've given my words a meaning that I never dreamed of. And you've tried to twist them into a cold, logical excuse for your ugly murder. Oh, they never were that, Brandon. And you can't make them that. There must have been something deep inside you from the very start that let you do this thing. But there's always been something deep inside me that would never let me do it. And would never let me be a party to it now.
This clearly shows Rupert's attempt to draw a distinction between him, Brandon, and Philip, which allows the moral boundaries of the film to take shape. By standing in opposition to Brandon and Philip, Rupert, an initially neutral party, assigns a moral value to their actions and shows the audience that Brandon and Philip deserve to be punished for their moral perversions.
He was, he was Jimmy Stewart, and I had a feeling he was a bit unsure about the part, because in a sense, he is as much a heavy as the boys are, because he was their teacher, and he never really played that kind of part before. So I don't know how he felt. I think he felt a bit uncomfortable, really. Someone like James Mason would be more acceptable, really, than Stewart. I think that's maybe one of the reasons that it wasn't such a big hit. They didn't like Stewart in that kind of part.
Exactly how Rupert plans to punish Philip and Brandon is also interesting. He decides to expose their crime and allow society to punish them as they see fit.
By what right do you dare say that there's a superior few to which you belong? By what right did you dare decide that that boy in there was inferior and therefore could be killed? Did you think you were God, Brandon? Is that what you thought when you choked the life out of him? Is that what you thought when you served food from his grave? Well, I don't know what you thought or what you are, but I know what you've done. You've murdered. You've strangled the life out of a fellow human being who could live and love as you never could. And never will again.
What are you doing?
It's not what I'm going to do, Brandon. It's what society's going to do. I don't know what that'll be, but I can guess, and I can help. You're going to die, Brandon, both of you. You're going to die.
Not once in this discussion of punishment does Rupert mention the legal system or the fact that Brandon and Philip will be charged with murder. This may be because by exposing that Brandon and Philip committed a murder, he is in essence exposing their homosexual act, outing them to a society that abhors homosexuality. And like murder, their homosexuality will be punished for not adhering to the obligations to the society we live in. The subtext isn't an accident. The film's screenwriter Arthur Lawrence was gay, as were both Granger and Dahl. It's likely that Hitchcock, seeing the opportunity to create an underlying tension in his audience, took advantage of his star's personal experience by heightening the sexuality, albeit with an attempt at subtlety in order to appease studio censors. Yet, with the sophistication that comes with decades' worth of progress and understanding of queer identities and experience, the motif in Rope is, at times, hilariously obvious, especially when Rupert brings up Brandon's youthful penchant for murdering chickens on an acquaintance's farm.
Here, let me help. White or dark?
A little of both on this for Mrs. Atwater.
What about you?
I don't eat it.
How queer. I never heard of anyone who didn't eat chicken. Did you, Brandon? Oh, you probably did. Why don't you eat it, Philip?
I just don't.
Well, now, there must be a reason. Freud says there's a reason for everything. Even me.
There's no reason, Janet.
Well, as I remember, Philip, you have a very funny reason. Doesn't he, Brandon?
Yes.
No, I knew there had to be one. Now, what is it?
Oh,
Tell.
it's nothing too much.
Well, I think it's quite fascinating.
Come on, Brandon, please.
Well, it happened about 3 years ago in Connecticut. Mother has a place there, you know. We were going to have chickens, so we walked over to the farm. It was a lovely Sunday morning in late spring. Across the valley, the church bells were ringing, and in the yard, Philip was doing likewise to the necks of 2 or 3 chickens.
Oh, dear.
It was a task he usually performed very competently. But on this particular morning, his touch was perhaps a trifle too delicate. Because one of the subjects for our dinner table suddenly rebelled. Like Lazarus, he rose...
That's a lie.
Philip.
There isn't a word of truth in the whole story. I never strangled a chicken in my life.
Now, look here, Philip.
I never strangled a chicken, and you know it.
Forgive me, but it just seemed very funny, you two being so intense about an old dead chicken.
Sorry. We were ridiculous and very rude. I apologize for both of us and the story.
Well. Is it all over?
I'm afraid so, Rupert.
Oh, what a pity. In another moment, you might have been strangling each other instead of a chicken. I'm in quite an embarrassing position.
How do you mean?
Well, I seem to be the only one having a good time.
You and Mrs. Atwater?
What's going on, Philip?
Would you mind turning that off?
Sorry.
I don't like to play with light in my eyes.
You know, Philip, I get quite intrigued when people don't answer questions, and quite curious.
Did you ask me a question?
Yes, Philip, I asked you a question.
Well, what was it?
I asked you what is going on here.
A party?
Yes, but a rather peculiar party. What's it all about, Philip?
What's what all about? Now stop playing crime and punishment, Rupert. You want to know something, come out with it, otherwise...
Oh, no, temper. Now, don't stop.
I'd like a drink.
Oh, wait, I'll get it for you. Now, keep playing. What would you like, Scotch?
No, brandy.
You're very fond of that little tune, aren't you? You know, Philip, I wish I could come straight out with what I want to know. Unfortunately, I don't know anything. I merely suspect. I said that
I heard you.
Is all right?
Thank you.
You use this?
Sometimes.
I thought only beginners did. I must say...
All right, Rupert. I'll ask you. What do you suspect?
Oh, I've forgotten. Where's David, Philip?
I don't know. Why?
Brandon knows.
Does he?
Doesn't he?
Not that I know.
Oh, come now.
I don't. Why don't you ask Brandon?
I have. But he's too busy maneuvering the other 2 points of the triangle. What for, Philip? Just what is Brandon trying to do with Janet and Kenneth? What's the matter? What are you laughing at?
Nothing.
What am I so far off the track?
There's nothing going on at all, Rupert.
You're, more than usually allergic to the truth tonight, Philip. That's the second time you haven't told it.
Thanks. When was the first?
When you said you'd never strangle a chicken.
You're confused. Brandon dreamt that up. For the sake of a very unfunny joke.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't, Philip. And if you'll think back very carefully, you'll realize that I know he didn't. About a year ago, I was up at the farm, you remember? One morning I saw you display your handiwork. You're quite a good chicken strangler, as I recall.
Well, I just meant that Brandon's story wasn't true. I didn't mean I hadn't killed any chickens.
That's what you said.
Well, I didn't think it was a suitable topic of conversation while we were eating.
You could have said that.
All right, I didn't.
We're not eating now, Philip. What'd you lie to me for?
Because I don't like to talk about...
About what? Strangling?
I can't play with that thing.
What is so fascinating about the queer subtext in Hitchcock's films is that he knew, as a director and a provocateur, that making the simple suggestion of homosexuality was enough to create unease, to raise the stakes for both his characters and his audience. As a director, Hitchcock did not moralize. Rather, he simply examined and portrayed what was common occurrence. It was up to his viewers to determine how his characters' own neuroses, often dysfunctional behavior exhibited as a result of societal pressure and attitudes, affected their actions, for good or for ill. To ask that of an audience is not just a bold move, it is also indicative of a thoughtful director who expected his viewers to reach their own conclusions. To contrast, however, is a final word from screenwriter Arthur Lawrence.
I try to make a character for this dead boy whom you supposedly never saw. Of course, Hitch crossed me up because he shot the scene of the actual murder and inserted it into the picture. I think he did it because he had a failure of nerve. I thought the suspense would be, is there or is there not a body in that chest? Well, here he eliminated that. Once you see it, you know they're murderers and you know they're going to get caught. And I think it took a lot of the tension out of the picture. At least it did for me.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, I first experienced this film in black and white. I didn't even realize it was in Technicolor. I'm certainly biased to my initial viewing, but I find this so much more effective in black and white. Next time you watch this film, turn the color down and see what you think. Rope is perceived as a second-tier Hitchcock film, more known for a directorial stunt than for the story or acting, which is a shame, as it is truly a film worth appreciating for its own merits. I have been obsessed with it for years. Thank you for listening to Eclectic Obsessions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe on iTunes. Leave me a review. All 5-star reviews will be read on the show. You can follow the show on Facebook at Eclectic Obsessions, on Twitter at Eclectic Obsess1, on Instagram at Eclectic Obsessions Podcast, and on YouTube at Eclectic Obsessions. I'd love to hear what you think. Feel free to email the show at ecobpod@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new Eclectic Obsession.